Hello, everyone, and welcome to Handmade Hero. This is the show where normally we code a complete game from scratch live on stream at 5 p.m., but today we're doing it at 8:30 p.m., so it's a weird time. And I may just fall straight asleep in the middle of the stream. So maybe like we're typing in the code, and then I just fall asleep. It could happen, you never know. So anyway, where we left things off yesterday is I talked about wanting to do a little bit of a modification to the way in which the renderer was sort of integrated into the platform code, and I outlined basically what that was going to be. For those of you who may not remember, really what I wanted to do was make it so that the game itself doesn't call out into the OpenGL renderer. The game just produces a buffer of instructions for the OpenGL code, and then the OpenGL code does its thing. That's what I wanted to do. And today we're going to go ahead and do that. Not very complicated, right? It's not a particularly weird thing to want to do. So hopefully it's something that you guys will just be like, oh yeah, right, I see what's going on, no problem. So today's day 230, no it's not. Today's 240. So if you want to follow along at home, use the day 239 source code, and that's where I'm at. Okay, so let's go ahead and bring the game back up here. Right now, we basically have everything working through OpenGL, but we don't actually have things working correctly through OpenGL. There's obviously the architectural change that I wanted to make, but there's also the other thing I mentioned, which is our textures are not working properly at the moment, meaning we don't download them in the way that we might want. So there's a bunch of OpenGL stuff that we want to be able to do that we're not doing at the moment. And so we have more OpenGL work to do. But before we do any more of that, I wanted to take care of this aspect of it first. All right. So let's go ahead and do that. See how we need to do that. So what I want to be able to do here is I want to be able to carry a single render group kind of all the way through for the entirety of the process that needs to happen. And so if you take a look at what goes on here, like for example in debug, oh, that's interesting. I guess I pulled that out. Well, you know what? Good for me. If you take a look at what happens here in debug game frame end, you can see that inside here we actually do a bunch of stuff with our actual rendering in the debug code, right? And so right now we actually create and destroy two different render groups, essentially. One that renders the game and one that renders the debug group. Right now they both, that's all controlled inside the game. So what I'd like to move to is something where all of these actually just take a render group in and do their rendering through the render group, and the render group comes from the platform layer, so that way I don't have this thing with the game calling out to OpenGL, which is what it's, what it was doing. Yeah. All right, so let's take a look at how we might do that. So first of all, inside handmade platform.h, where we include our stuff, we would need to start having our handmade handmade render group stuff would have to be sort of known to the platform layer, if that makes sense, in at least some limited capacity. We can start this in something in a way that's not too onerous, right? We can start this by saying, well, when we call through, to the game here, and we pass in, right? Because here's our game update and render. We pass the game memory, the game input, and we pass this game off-screen buffer, right? What we can do is say, let's go ahead and take that game off-screen buffer out of the picture, right? Let's pull that back, if that makes sense. And this is a very simple change, but it's going to take a while to make because it happens to sort of be in everything. I appear to have gotten like a... I got water on my glasses. Let's see if I can get that off. I drank a little too vigorously from the water bottle, it would appear. Much better. Okay, so if I want to get rid of that, and replace it with something else. And game off-screen buffer essentially is the thing that now I would be replacing. I would be replacing that with a instead of looking like this, where we say what the pixels are and all that stuff. I would be replacing this essentially with that game render group, right? So the render group would actually be what I would be passing in. And so let's just start by making that change, and we'll see how it goes. So game, and you can see right here, rendering specifically will become a 3-tiered abstraction. That's exactly what we're sort of doing now, right? We already sort of started to introduce that with the OpenGL side of things. So this to do is actually exactly what we're doing right now. So let's just take this one step at a time. Here's game off-screen buffer. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to replace that, and I'm just going to say that we're going to pass render group. And so this right here, the render group itself is exactly what we're passing. So we're passing this thing in. Okay. So let's go ahead and do that. And now we can sort of see that, well, the buffer, actually, we should probably not call it buffer. Let's call it render group, like so. So now we have the sort of stuff where we've got the widths and heights and those sort of things that are being dealt with in here. And I want to just get rid of those. And for the time being, I'm gonna get rid of the test weird draw buffer size, because I don't really care about that at the moment. We can always add that back in where we're doing more and stuff later. And we don't have to care now about any of this stuff either, right? All of this stuff can go away as well. All right. We don't need to do our render group allocation either. That can now, again, move outside to Win32 Handmade. So when we do update and render in here, right? When we do game update and render, we can do the allocate render group stuff at that point, right? So we can say, all right, let's go ahead and take this out, and we'll put in our sort of our allocation stuff there. So maybe we'd put that. I'm not sure exactly where we'd want to put that. Maybe we'd put that in here, perhaps. I'm not 100% certain where we would want to put it exactly, but it would come out somewhere here. I guess, to be honest, maybe since we're gonna have to do routing for like the assets and stuff like that, really what we probably will have to do is make it so that the game can give us back, can sort of, well, I guess what I mean is we're going to need some way for the game to participate in this process in a way that isn't quite fully not owning the render group, because we don't want to move all of this stuff out. We only want just the render group. So it's going to take us a little while to massage it into a place where these two pieces are no longer, are essentially abstracted away, right? Because the asset part where we call into the render group, that part is sort of going to have to call through to something. And as I'm saying it, I feel like maybe that means we should name this something different, if that makes sense. Like, we might be able to make this easier on ourselves by saying that really just the push buffer part is going to be out here, if that makes sense. And the render group just takes that push buffer when it is actually going to start rendering, right? So it's more like this. That seems like a saner, because I don't want to have to get the asset stuff. I don't want to have to pull all that out. That seems like it's just going to be a huge pain, and there's no benefit to it. It would actually just make things worse, I think. And so I think what I really want to do here is actually have a thing called a platform or game push buffer or game render buffer, something like that. Game render commands. I don't know. Commands, something like that, let's say. And so then up here where we're talking about the game output buffer stuff, the game off-screen buffer stuff, right? What I could do is say, like, okay, we've got a game render commands thing, and that can still have the width and the height in it potentially, but then it's going to have the part here for the render group where it had like the stuff where the push buffer information was. So all of the stuff that was for the push buffer that all comes over here, but everything else can stay on the other side, right, in the game where it probably belongs. And that seems like a better idea to me, right? So there's our game render commands. That seems like a better way to go there. So I'm going to leave it like that. And then in here, we'll create one of those. So we have one of these game render commands things, right? And this will just be like allocate render commands. And it just doesn't need most of this stuff, right? So it doesn't need any of this stuff. And really, I guess when we do allocate render commands, probably this should be something that's in the platform layer itself. So maybe that's even something that's, that might even be something that we kind of want to handle separately. So it may be like that it's actually like, okay, we get render commands and we just do something like, okay, we have a render commands, we say initialize render commands, and we just say like, okay, that's going to take however big the render commands are, and well, that's probably it. So it'd be something like this, where we'd say like initialize these guys, and we're going to need some memory. So we'd have something like you know, render command size. Or maybe push buffer size and push buffer, and that would do something like this. This would be a virtual alloc here, and I do this push buffer size, push buffer, right? And that would just be something where we pass the stuff that we know that we actually need. For example, here's the game off-screen buffer stuff. And so maybe we pass these guys as well, right? So in here, we have these. And so now we know that this thing can be initialized in a particular way by feed forwarding, feeding forward the information that we have there. And maybe that's just a thing right here that's like a nice little inline that any platform layer who wants to implement this can do. Okay. So there's the, and I guess we sort of said here that this has to be U32. So I guess we're talking about something smaller. It's got to be always smaller, which I guess makes sense. All right, so anyway, so there's our push buffer. Here is our width and height. I don't know why those are ints. So let's put that in there. And then we've got render commands. That is the output of this thing. So let's see here. And you know what we could do too? We could do it like this. Because again, it's an inline, so it shouldn't really be a problem. It should be able to do it this way. Now I guess there is one sort of nastiness there, which is that if we're doing all this in C, then the inline part wouldn't work, right? So I'll have to think about what I want to do about that. I could make it a pound define. Basically what I need to do, just so in case you're not quite on board with that, is in render group, we have the allocate call, right? And the allocate call kind of does its thing here, right? Where it initializes all this stuff. And we need that stuff to happen, right? We want all of this stuff we want to be able to do all these things. And so I want, this, let's see, I want all of this stuff to happen there. Let's see, clear render values. So yeah, clear render values would need to set these things like the push buffer size, push buffer base, push buffer element count, sort entry. So it would need to set all of this stuff, right? So basically this is what I'm talking about. Something that handles all of this stuff for us. So it's like there's the push buffer element count, there's a sort entry at, here is the size is 0, and all that stuff is there. So basically all of these things. And I guess, in some sense, Yeah, and sometimes I'm going to have to kind of pull some of that out a little bit also if we want to keep the ground chunk thing happening. Which at this point, the ground chunks have been so annoying the entire time that I feel like at this point we probably just want to say not bother with them because, like I said, I don't actually think we need them for anything. But that's sort of a separate issue. Anyway, so we want something like this, and we have to be able to initialize these things. We don't need this part, obviously, so we really only need this part where we say, okay, the push buffer base is whatever is happening in here. The max push buffer size is whatever gets passed in as the push buffer size. We've got the width and height. Like so. We've got the... Let's see, what else we got? Element count and the sort entry at. So all of this is pretty much it. That's all we need to do to initialize one of these guys, right? And there really isn't anything else that's necessary. So if we assume that this was a pound define, I guess we could just make it a pound define that someone uses to make sure that they initialize one of these correctly. It would look like this, right? Width, height, max push buffer size, push buffer, the push buffer base, the element count, and the sort entry at. So we could do something like this, where we basically say, okay, oops, I should keep that in there. Render command struct, something like this. And that's just an easier way for them to make sure they get the parameters in the right order and stuff like that, right? Does that make sense? So now you can do like, okay, I want to initialize one of these. I've got render commands equals render command struct, and now I can pass how big I wanted the size to be, and I can pass the push buffer that I had, and I can pass the width and height. And I know that the macro will like do the right thing there and won't mess everything up. So now each time through, we would generate one of these render commands things. Then when we do game update and render, we just pass that render command buffer in. And then what we can do by the exact same token is as we come down here, and before that we're actually going to render, when we call debug frame end, instead of passing the buffer, we just pass the render commands again. And then when we get down to the very end, before we start with the stuff that would be happening with the vblank and all that stuff, right? We would have, after everyone was finished, both the debug code and the game code would have stuffed all of their things that they wanted to render into the push buffer for the render commands. We would then be able to say, okay, now that you did all that stuff, just go ahead and render all that, right? So when we do our display buffer in window here, instead of us having to do like the global back buffer thing where we have a particular back buffer or whatever's happening there, our Win32 display buffer in window could actually just take whatever the render commands are that are supposed to be happening now. And then Win32 display buffer in window could be responsible for basically taking care of that process. So it would take the game render commands here are the commands, like so. And then we could go ahead and have we can go ahead and have that do the rendering right here. So what it could do is it could say like, oh, okay, if I am in hardware, right? If I'm in hardware, then here I'm going to call the OpenGL render. And so now we're basically taking this part here where we had the this stuff, right? here we're taking this stuff and we're moving it back out to where we were before, this part right here, right? Okay, so what I want to do is say, all right, if we're going to do the rendering here, then we have to do our sort entries thing. We kind of want to do all at the end. And so I don't know what the best way is to make sure that triggers, but let's just say that that's going to be in part of the multiple tier thing. So we would sort our commands, no question, right? That's going to happen. So we do our sort our commands, and we'd have to be able to supply some temp memory here. If that's not a problem, obviously we'd have plenty of room for temp memory, so we just have to make sure that we actually have that. In fact, we could actually include the temp memory in the command. So instead of having that be an allocation, we could have that actually being something that's we just have temp memory that's in the command structure. So we do something like we sort all the entries together, and then in here we would go ahead and do our actual rendering. So we have like render to OpenGL and tiled render group to output. Those two things are the two things that we would do exactly as we did them here. Only now we don't have to call any kind of a platform thing. We just have the ability to call the two different render paths that we have. Okay? So that's the first thing that we would start to do. Now, I want to kind of say again, because I mentioned the 3-tiered architecture thing way back 200 days ago, right? 200 hours of programming. So what is that in work time? 40 into that is what, 5? So 5 weeks ago in programmer time, I mentioned this, where we were going to have a 3-tiered architecture. This is where the 3rd tier comes in, right? So you can kind of see we've got platform code and we have game code. That tier in the middle is the renderer. And it's the OpenGL part that renders OpenGL or the part that renders in software. You can see it starting to split out into that 3rd tier. Everything else stays in one place or the other, but just that resolution of the render instructions is in that 3rd tier, which allows you to kind of switch it. And this is also where you can see how you might implement, if you want to implement a different kind of renderer like DirectX or something. This is where that would be, right? You just have a switch statement here of like which render I want to call, and you'd call whichever one you wanted. Hopefully that makes some sense. All right, so we know we have to sort. We know we have to do our, all of our sort of stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and first of all cut this part out. So here's the tiled render group to output. That's going to do its tiled rendering. And so then I would have this part where we do our stretch DI bits to the window. That would happen here. And then the in hardware part, I've got render to OpenGL obviously going on there. That's this part. We don't really need this code anymore. We can pretty much get rid of it. This was just the stuff that kind of does the blit, right? And I don't know that we super care about that. We could, if we wanted to, still do this part, I guess. I mean, we can certainly just save it, just because why not, I suppose. And this would be some alternate path. So you basically say like, okay, we do tiled render group to output, and then there's another if statement here, which is like, how did you actually want to display the software renderer? Oops. Did you want to display the software renderer through OpenGL or not? This is like, B32 display via hardware. So. And so this code here, where did my swap buffers go? There it is. Okay. Can stay as well. And so really, this is what we're looking at. So we've got our hardware path where we render to OpenGL and we do our swap buffers. We've got our software render path where we call the software renderer and then display it either in hardware or via some kind of a stretch split and letting Windows figure out how it's going to get down to the hardware. Right, not our problem at that point. And so that's really all I'm talking about. So as you can see, this is like a very, very simple thing. So really, it's just going to take us a bunch of code sort of cleaning around all the edges now to get this to compile and run properly, but that's really all we're talking about here. That's it. That's the only real substantive change that I actually wanted to make. So, okay. that's where we're at. So we have our game render commands, and when we call render to OpenGL, let's try to make that function work properly here. You know what I could also do? I can have this be an inline here, which is like inline void display bitmap via OpenGL or something. I can, since this is all OpenGL code, I could clearly, right, make all of this be in there, and so this is a little bit more readable now that we just have, you know, display bitmap via OpenGL, and we pass whatever we need to pass there. Right, that's not too bad. But anyway, so if I have game render commands here, and I want to do the OpenGL render to output, now we're no longer taking any of this stuff, right? We're just taking the commands, and then we need some way of making this stuff work. So here's our commands now has the width and height in it, which, you know, obviously was good. That's the thing that we wanted to be able to do. So we have that in there. And now we go through and we look at what else we've got. We need the push buffer element count. In fact, let's just look at all the things that render group that it uses from render group. And it looks like basically we have them all, right? So all we have to do is just straight up replacement. We take whatever the commands were, and that's where all of our stuff is coming from, as you can see. So really that's all there is to it, pretty much, period. So we've got commands, sort entry at, commands, there we go. And let me see what else we got here. Can I look at where's the platform? There it is. I just want to see what's going on here. So yeah, in here, display bitmap via OpenGL. What have we got? This guy is doing window width, window height. So that's doing a blit out to the whole screen. So maybe we don't want to do that. Maybe we want to do this, since we're displaying the buffer, maybe we do it this way. In the future, we'll do it a little differently. Well, no, you know what? I'll leave it. I don't know. This is something we're going to want to change a little bit later, is I guess the only thing. So we'd want something that looks like this a little bit more. There we go. And so this is basically just going to take one of those, one of the buffers like we had in here, which is to say, it's like the global back buffer or whatever. It's this thing, Win32 off-screen buffer, right? So what did the Win32 off-screen buffer have in it? It's just got width, height, pitch, bytes per pixel, and memory. So I think we probably just want this. We probably just want to say, hey, here's a bitmap coming from OpenGL. I'm sorry, coming from like our software renderer or whatever. Could you please render it? And then we just go ahead and say, okay, there's the height, width, height, and the memory. Again, width and height. And that stuff just pretty much is all we need. Now, there is one part that's a little weird, which is that the pitch pretty much has to be the height, the width times 32. So we could also say here that assert that the pitch equals the width times 4. Because we only support that right now. In the OpenGL path here, we don't support multiple pitches. So that's just a restriction, and we might as well assert it so people who use it won't get super confused. So we also have this screen space thing that we did before, which we could, if we wanted to, we could now leverage this code that we had previously. So here's our screen space texture stuff. We could just have a thing that's like inline void set or OpenGL set screen space, and that could do the code. That could do this code right here, and so we could just make this OpenGL set screen space, and it would just do that stuff automatically. And as you can see, we kind of need the width, height, and I guess that set screen space could also do our viewport call for us if we wanted to. Probably. Well, maybe that's not true. So let's just say that it takes a width and height, and we'll leave the viewport thing as separate, because like I said, we're going to probably want to do something with that a little later on. All right, so I'm going to make these be the only two parameters to it. And so that'll set up our matrices for us. That means we can call OpenGL screen space in both places. Like so. and I'm going to make this OpenGL display bitmap. Yeah, so this goes away, and that's all good there. And then this lower triangle, GL triangles bit with the color, that's just an OpenGL rectangle call now. So this whole thing, we can also do by just saying like, oh, min p, max p color, that's an OpenGL rectangle, get rid of all this, and that's done as well. So this all gets much, much more simplified, and that's nice, right? Height. And then our OpenGL screen space call here, we need the commands width and height, so this stuff passes through. Looking pretty reasonable, right? So now we kind of have our OpenGL stuff starting to take shape. You can see how that works. There's nothing particularly fancy going on here. Again, the texture loading stuff still not right at all, but we're kind of converging on something that's fairly clean, and you can see what it does. There's nothing weird going on there, right? So that seems reasonable. Let's bounce back here. Go to global back buffer. All right. So Win3do display buffer in window now, when we get a WM paint message, is just not going to work, right? So I feel like when we get WM paint messages, we're probably just going to have to ignore them. Because we won't really be able to do anything sensible there. Our OpenGL state will not necessarily be set up for anything. We won't necessarily even have a back buffer. Now, we could save a back buffer in OpenGL for the same case, but that's something that we definitely don't want to worry about now, if ever. So for the time being, I'm going to say let's get rid of this, and we'll deal with that at some point in the future if we ever even care about it at all. So here's our Win3do display buffer in window call again, where we were working on things. Again, it has to do with sort entries. This is the real third tier coming into play here in a big way, because this is actually a platform non-specific, but in the third tier operation. So that's like Handmade, and you know, we almost might want to rename these a little bit, like, but Handmade, you know, this is just the renderer specifically. So it's like Handmade, you know, render shared or something like that would be what this actually does, the sorting entries part of things. So if I do handmade render.cpp here, perhaps, again, I'm not really sure what we want to call it, but this would be like the utility functions for renderers, right? And so that sort entry call, which we're currently doing over here in the render group, that thing has to be outside, and it has to be, so all of these sorting things, that has to be, I guess this is, where are we? Merge, sort, and swap. That's it. Yeah. That has to be something that's out here in Handmade Render, and that can be accessed by anyone who might want to use it, right? Okay. So much like OpenGL is used in here, so now we've got our handmade render.cpp is used in here. And again, strictly flowing in that direction. So that's all fine, no big deal there. And so then we've got, we're a little bit closer, right? We're a little bit closer to working. Okay, so in Win3do Handmade, I'm going to go back to where I was there just a minute ago. And so we've got our sort entries. That's just a render call that preps things. We come in here, we can either call render to OpenGL with the commands that we're doing, and I don't think we need anything else for that. We might want to pass the window width and window height. Like I was saying before, that's sort of something we probably want to address eventually. So I'm going to put that in there, even though right now we're not quite using it. We'll see a little later on that that's actually something we're probably going to want. Just in case our display, our window width is not the same as our render, we may want to put like black bars, you know, like, or change aspect ratio or crop. There's a bunch of things we might want to do there. So the render commands and the window width thing may, you know, like I said, we may just want that to be a separate thing. So we're going to do window width and window height here, which are not the same. And this would be equivalently true for this guy, where it would have the window width and the window height, and you know, can choose to use those if it so desires. So there's what we're dealing with now. We've got our display buffer and window. This passes it to OpenGL. And so now here where we've got tiled render group to output, and we've got render queue, and all this stuff. So the render queue now is actually, oh, wow, this is actually going to be really nice. Now that render queue no longer probably even has to go through the it's entirely in the platform layer as well, which is really kind of nice because now it doesn't have to round trip through the game. So that's real nice. That's great. I didn't even think of that as a nice reason to do this. That means that threading for Handmade Hero we might be able to keep threading out of the game entirely and only in the platform layer if we wanted to. We may want to keep it in there for for accelerating simulation. And I guess I don't mean threading out of entirely. I mean this part of the threading. That's interesting. All right. Anyway, ignore that for now. Pretend I never said anything. But point being, here we've got our thread stuff where we pass. Where is it? 132 make queue. Where we have our high priority queue, low priority queue. So I'm going to go ahead and say that the platform work queue here just gets passed in. And that way this guy just gets it directly from here, like so. These are commands, no longer a render group. We've got our output target and temp arena. The output target is going to be that global render buffer. And the temp arena now we shouldn't actually need because the entries are getting sorted up here. So if I go back to my Handmade render group and I look at tiled render group to output, I'm assuming that the temp arena just is not necessary anymore. Because it's the sort stuff. Oh, it looks like it wasn't even being used anyway. Yeah, it was only in the sort stuff anyway, right? So that's all fine. So now we've got this function, the tiled render group to output, and that's obviously going to have to move out into that shared code where like sort entries and that sort of stuff is, right? So here's our sort entries. Tiled render group to output's going to move out as well. Let's see. Render group to output. I think all of this stuff should be, because this is the software renderer, right? Do tiled render work, tiled render group to output. Yeah, so I think all of this stuff kind of comes out here, right? That all moves out. And let's see. So this is all. I assume most of this stuff comes out. Yeah, I assume like this is basically almost everything in Handmade render group that doesn't involve building up the stuff that's getting pushed should come out and into the because we're basically moving the renderer out, if that makes sense. But render group itself doesn't actually need to come out for any reason. So I want to be somewhat cautious here in this. Let's see. Get camera rectangle at distance, get camera to target, all sources present, project. All of these are things which stay. Push rect, push font, but bitmap, get bitmap dim, all of those stay. Push render element definitely stays. Get render end basis stays. Orthographic perspective. Begin and end render, all of these are still the same. Allocate render group. Clear render values will stay but change. But I think all the rest, this is rendering, so this comes out. Draw matte. Change saturation, which we don't call anymore. Someone asked me to make that quickly, and we did one time on the Q&A. I think that's not even used. All of this stuff, draw rectangle slowly, sample environment, bilinear blend, draw rectangle, unscale and bias normal, and unpack 4x4. So I think all of these guys come out. I'm going to get rid of this ignore timed function stuff for now as well. Don't really want any of this in here at the moment. Go. And so now, like, the render group thing again is just turning into the thing. All this is supposed to be doing is brokering that process of putting things into the command queue and also notifying the asset system that we need things, right? It's still doing that part of the process as well. All right. So there's Handmade render, and again, that's like it's platform non-specific, but it's sort of a three-tiered thing. Right, again, like I said, this is the three-tiered architecture that I was talking about way back when, finally coming into play. It looks like this, right? It's here's the platform layer, here's the game, and now here's the renderer. and the renderer is kind of like the split thing that has some platform-specific code and some non-platform-specific code. Like it may have like an OpenGL-specific thing, and then it's also got some non-specific stuff. And you can think of this stuff as really being part of the game code if you want, because it is platform non-specific, but I choose to think of it as like sort of, this is a hybrid layer that has platform-specific and non-specific. So this is like purely non, right? This is purely platform, and this is like a hybrid, right? And that's just what I mean when I keep referring to a three-tiered architecture for that. That's what I mean. So, stretching out. I didn't fall asleep yet, so that's good. So yeah, so I think that's mostly what we need to do structurally, and we just gonna have a lot of compile error cleanup that we're gonna have to do to make all this work. But that's the name of the game. That's how you make architectural changes. You have to do a lot of cleanup. So let's see here. I am going to start. How do I want to start? Well, I guess we'll just see where we're at compile error-wise and maybe move along from there. All right. So clear render values, I would like to find out who is doing clear render values, and I think I may just get rid of that concept entirely. So if I look, so nRender does clear render values. How many times do we do an nRender? That's the only place that actually does that. Let me take a look at who's doing that. So nRender happens once at the end of the game. It happens once at the end of the debug code, and then it happens at the fill ground chunk work stage. So really, we never actually begin or end renders at all. Yeah, so that stuff I think we get rid of all that stuff. I think the begin and end render stuff, I think that all just goes away. I think we just have render group and we allocate and deallocate the render group entirely. And so one other thing that has to happen here is if we want to use generation IDs to protect our asset loading, which if you remember, that's how we protect if we want threaded things to work with the asset system. We have some protection there to prevent things from being unloaded and stuff. I don't know that that's a system we want to stick with in the long run, but we should keep supporting it because it's something that we were doing. We had that notion of a generation ID, right? That now has to be something that's pushed forward via the buffer. So basically, inside our Handmade platform code, we need in here that has to come from here. So that has to come, generation ID has to come from that. So there's our generation ID. Generation ID. So that's how that has to move out, just because since we can't consider the assets unlocked until the render has completed, we need to make sure that the generation IDs are per sweep, which includes everyone who might render to it. So begin and render, end render now can go away as well. Those have been simplified out, and we don't have to worry about them anymore. So now what we could do is say, like, okay, when we allocate a render group system here, all we really need to do is just have begin render happen at the bottom, right? So now it just looks like this. Generation ID doesn't matter. So it really just looks like that. End render does basically end render, begin render, those two generation IDs. I'm not sure why the generation is stored on the assets. Do you guys remember why we put it on the assets? Is that just because we didn't have a better place for it? Or what? Begin asset lock. Oh, because it needs to take the asset lock. That looks like the primary reason, I guess. Yeah, that looks like it. So you know what? Now that I think about it, I suppose we don't really need to do it that way at all. We could simplify this a little bit more. Instead of having begin generation, end generation, we could just have a thing where we do both begin and end generation together. Where we just have advanced generation, right? Because what happens when we come through is we take the asset lock, right? We then say, all right, let's go ahead and like make a new generation here that's in flight. We then later on we sort of clean that up. But we could just do this like this, right? We could just clean up all the in-flight generations and then switch to the next one. And so we just assume that there's always one in-flight generation on every frame, right? Because that's what's essentially happening for the most part. So even that seems like it could be simplified. So right here, this is really, we could just say this is advanced generation for the game assets, if that makes sense. And it returns that U32. And that way we just do that at the top of the frame, and that's pretty much all there is to it, I think. Yeah, that seems right to me. Now, the only thing that I'm not sure about is how that necessarily gets communicated. At the moment, to be honest, I don't even know how that was getting communicated to the debug system directly, because the debug system makes use of it to draw fonts and stuff. So I'm not sure how it was accessing that. How was it accessing the assets, dare I ask? So allocate render group assets. How is it getting the assets? Debug start. So it gets passed the assets by whom? Debug get game assets. Where does that happen? Anyone? Debug get game assets. So yeah, it just gets the game assets straight out of the thing anyway. So that's pretty straightforward. I think we could simplify this quite a bit. I think in here, when we do advanced generation, I think in here we don't really even have to do this. We could just say like, okay, advanced generation is a void. It advances the thing, and then what you actually do here is you say like, I'm going to say whatever the current generation is and return that. So there's like get current generation. You know what I'm saying? And they're like non-overlapping. I feel like that's a better way to do it. I suppose one problem with that is you can't be multi-threaded on that. Well, okay. Here's what I'll say. We can leave it the way it is now and not have to really do all that much with it. We can leave it doing essentially this. What I could do is just emulate exactly what I want by going into when we actually start game update and render. When I want to start the asset generation stuff, we can just say, all right, if there was a generation, start the generation, otherwise make a new one, right? So we'd say something like, if a generation is in progress, end the generation, right? And then in here, we just do begin generation. Because the problem that I'm having with this maybe that. The problem that I'm having right now, just thinking it through, is just like the generation ID wants to apply across the frame. It needs to apply like outside, right? And so I'm just not sure how to do that in any way that makes much sense without exporting the concept of generation, of begin and end generation, out to the platform layer. Which maybe is what we should do. Maybe that should happen. Or maybe this better thing is like we shouldn't have really ever done this generation ID stuff in the first place, right? I mean, it could be that because we did it mostly to support, in fact, entirely to support the stupid ground chunks. So it may be that that's just a huge pain in the butt for no apparent reason. And if we just decide to kill the ground chunks, then no one would care, right? Because otherwise, if we didn't want to support the ground chunk stuff, we'd just have one centralized time when assets are cleaned up, and we would never have to worry about the generation stuff at all, right? So, I don't know, it's 6 of one, half dozen the other. It does kind of seem like it probably wants to go that way, like because it just seems like adding all this complexity that doesn't really need to be there, and I can't think of any reason why we actually care. But I just don't want to touch too many moving pieces at once. So maybe what we'll say is we'll just say something like if transstate main generation ID, go ahead and let that cycle the generations at that time. But I think I might say to do, we should probably pull the generation stuff, because if we don't use ground chunks, it's a huge waste of effort. All right, so yeah. I'm okay with the rest of that. So at that point, since the generation ID stuff would now be in here, I guess the command buffer itself doesn't actually need to have the generation stuff in it. We can leave that stuff in the render group itself. It just doesn't do this stuff anymore, right? But it would still have in it what its generation ID is. So inside the render group, it would have that generation ID. That doesn't have to be in here now. It can have that in there, and all we would do is inside here where you start it up, you would pass the generation ID in. Well, actually, no, I guess you'd just get it. No, you'd pass it in, right? Generation ID. And the transstate basically would pass that in here, and so the render group would have generation ID set to whatever it needs to be set to. And that seems fine. So clear render values doesn't need to happen anymore. Here is our allocate render group. Our allocate render group actually doesn't need to do any of the things that it's currently doing at all anyway. So it never needs to actually take a memory arena or anything, because it doesn't actually have to do any memory allocation anymore, right? So now it's just something that holds the assets, doesn't need an arena, doesn't need a push buffer size. All it actually needs is the game render commands struct that it's going to push to. That's it. And so the render group basically has a thing in here, which is, game render commands. And then it's like, okay, game, we got the camera transform or whatever. And yeah, missing resource count may want to flow through as well. We'll see about that in a second. But I think everything else is pretty much right here. We're coming up with the 5-minute warning. I'm going to probably leave things non-compiling today because we're right in the middle of a bunch of sort of moving of things around, and I want to finish that. So we'll do that tomorrow and continue on with that. So anyway, inside allocate render group, we would pass in that generation ID, we'd stick it in here, and that'd be fine. And then all the rest of this stuff, like sort entry, push buffer size, push buffer element count, all of that stuff goes away, and we really are just going to be storing now instead, I guess it's a result here. Inside here, I guess what we would probably say is that the commands get stored just as a pointer. We don't need this. And I think that's everything. Right? So that looks about right to me. So we got our allocate render group. We've got all the rest of this stuff going. And so now all we'd have to do is in here where we talk about things like the render group, we dereference that group commands. We would take our game render commands. And everywhere that we were referencing push buffer kinds of stuff, we're now going to reference, you know, that command buffer. And that's all that is, I think. All right. So yeah, so the arena doesn't happen anymore. So now when we do an allocate render group, we're not really going to be doing that anymore. This is more going to just be a, like init render group or begin render group kind of a thing. And then I guess we'll have an end render group call as well. So our so our previous thing where we did begin and end render, we're just straight up doing begin and end render group, right? So we no longer allocate begin end, we just begin end. And the only reason this is even here is I think we want to do something like in the future, this kind of thing. You know, render group commands, missing resource count plus equals render group missing resource count, something like that probably, although who knows, maybe we don't even really need to do that. So the push struct doesn't happen now. Render group result, let's go ahead and make that happen. There we go. Inside render, let's see, that's not even a thing anymore. That is commands now. Allocate render group, identifier not found, that's true. And let's go ahead and grab that out. Begin render group does not need any of this. Does, however, need the main generation ID thing. Or wait, this would be its own generation ID, right? So that would actually be chunk generation ID. You know, why am I even porting this code? These ground chunks have been nothing but annoying the entire time, and I don't even want them in the game. I feel like these are just... I do not like... does not want ground chunk. Of course, probably need to do that at the very least. All right, so main generation ID, right, we don't actually know what that is yet. That's okay. Let's go ahead into the transient state, and we need our main generation ID. In there. And that should do it, I think. Yeah. All right, looks like we're just about out of time. Allocate render group, not found. That's fine. I don't really want to have to change everyone to put ampersand, so I'm just going to sort of substitute that in here. So we do render group, equals begin render group. There's the trying to read it, and the those two basically can go entirely away, and then we just pass that main generation ID in here. Sorry, begin render group. Okay. And what what else does it need? Oh, it needs the commands. It needs render commands, right? Oops. Commands. Let's see. Oh, and they go in the opposite order as well. There we are. So now we've got the begin render. Now we already do that. So end render is just end render group now. And temporary memory, render memory. I don't know that anyone's actually using any memory inside this area anymore anyway. So I think that might go away as well. I mean, I guess we might want to leave the Tran Arena doing that, but we can probably get rid of that boxing, if that makes sense. So that's probably just a waste of time now. Anyway, so we got draw buffer. So all of these things that take the draw buffer, I guess they're probably just taking those so that they have like a width and height to them, I'm guessing. Not really, I don't really know why they take the draw buffer. In fact, is there some way we can find out why they take the draw buffer? What does update and render title screen need that for? Yeah, so it's just using that to set the perspective. So it doesn't really need the draw buffer. What it really needs to know is just what the render output size is for the screen, right? And so that's actually something that we want to probably be doing in a different way. For the moment, you know, we can just do that with the render commands because it's got the width and the height in it. So we can, if we want to, do like loaded bitmap, draw buffer, to do Casey, eliminate these entirely, and this could just be passing that through. But what we can do is just make that be something that's actually a little more understood through the system. What a like target area is that it's rendering to. So draw buffer could really go away and no one would miss it in the slightest. So that's probably something we should change, that instead of being a draw buffer to just being like a screen spec. Like here's the specification for the output area that I actually want you to do. So render to output actually now no longer has to happen. All resources present is something we may want to have happen outside, and that's why I said we may want to have that in there. Again, I'm going to just put that in here as a little like to do Casey, do we want to check for resources like before? Probably. So yeah. So then we've got our debug stuff here. This again is going to be a begin render group, much like before. And in our debug state, where is our debug state? There it is, render group. That can actually just store the render group. No real reason not to. So that can do a begin render group here, but that only happens when we're not initialized. So that actually needs to happen right here, right? So when we do our render group for begin render, that's going to happen right here. And in fact, I guess now what that means, I guess I don't know, we probably don't even need to save this, do we? Maybe we do. Well, yeah, I guess we access it from there. So if we do debug render group, we do begin render group, we have the assets because we can get the assets, right? That's what we were doing here. So we can do a begin render group. We don't need any of the arenas anymore, which is really nice. So those aren't getting polluted at all. And then we can still use that main generation ID. I guess we could also just bump the generation ID, probably. No, we can't. It's got to stay locked till after the render. So inside this begin render group here, we need to pass the same one. So when we do the assets here, where are we doing that? Debug get assets. Get assets. That was in handmade.cpp. when we do our debug get game assets, it essentially needs to do this same exact process, right? So in here we need to do like debug get main generation ID. And hopefully, like I said, I would really prefer if we could eliminate that. Like, I don't like the fact that we still have to do that generation. I don't think it's something we probably want to keep, just based on it's like what I perceive its main value to be versus how complicated it makes things. It just doesn't seem like a good trade-off. So I kind of feel like that's something that we would want to get rid of. So there's the result. And this would be exactly the same as it was before. Yeah. To do Casey, really want to get rid of main generation ID. Yeah. Oops. Okay. So let's see. Can I convert from render group to render group? That's true. Should probably stop soon, huh? I hate when I'm in the middle of reorganizing code and I have to stop. That's the probably worst part about Handmade Hero, you gotta say. What are you gonna do, man? What are you gonna do? So render group just needs to be flattened out a little here. I don't know why these guys never, never quite did it. Got a pointer to the render group snapped, but they didn't for whatever reason. There we go. Actually, that one already has a render group. Why is it still dereferencing it? Does anyone know? Can't we just do that? Where is our memory? Oh, assets get passed into the debug start. So that's unfortunate. That basically means that we'd probably have to do this here. So main generation ID. So when we call debug start, right, we would say main, or well, actually, I guess we just do it right here. Okay, so begin render group. Function does not take 3 arguments. That is true. And so now we need to also pass in the render commands, right? I forget what we called that in the platform thing. It's game render commands. So we've got our game render commands, and when we call into here, we need to pass those commands in. And that's just a typo. Push font. All of these are obviously render group things. Don't know why that's not just using the regular asset call, but no bother, no worries. And then let's see, we've got our debug state render group here. That's the same thing we were having before. Let's see what else we've got. Unproject. Render to output doesn't exist anymore. And render does. And there it is. And there we go. So here's our debug start call. Our debug start call, debug state assets is going to have to pass the commands. So now we've got render commands in there. And so debug game frame end needs to take that as well, right? So debug game frame end in the platform layer. Where's that guy at? Process state. Let's see here. We've got debug. Yeah, let's see. Where is it? Where did it go? Where's my debug game frame end? How is that? Where is that defined? This is one of those, Casey is too old to remember this many code bases at once. Because shouldn't that be in the platform layer? It's called from the platform layer, isn't it? I thought we did. Oh, I know where it is. Right. It's right here. We pulled the debug stuff out into a separate place. That's fine. I'm fine with that. So it doesn't need the game off-screen buffer anymore. It just needs the render commands, right? So game render commands. There we go. And so now we just say, okay, render commands, and same thing here, render commands come in here. I don't know why, does debug end, what does debug end actually do with the draw buffer? Draw buffer. Absolutely nothing. All right, so this is actually just render commands width and height. And done. All right, so somewhat surprisingly, we can now stop and go to Q&A, but surprisingly, that's actually all of the game structural stuff. The game now compiles. So we're only dealing with the other part here, which is better than I would have expected. That didn't take too long. So that's not bad, because I ended up deciding to make a lot more changes than I was originally going to, because I kind of wanted to clean all of that out. So now those two systems both pile everything onto the render commands. The render commands then comes out to the platform layer, and then we can do whatever we want with it. So we now just have to go back and finish up this part here, right? Yeah, I mean, basically, like, you know what? That doesn't actually have to happen anymore either, does it? So anyway, inside here, oh, hey, look, and we just need the temp memory. So this is going to be pretty, it's really tempting to just finish this, but I'm going to not. So we'll save it for tomorrow. I'm going to go ahead and go to the Q&A. So if you have a question about what we're doing here, please go ahead and put it into the chat with Q: in front of it so I can see it. Martins, so no more hot reloading for renderer code. So we can if we want to, I guess is the way I would say it. If we get to the point where we want to play with that a little bit, then we certainly can. The only cost to us is we just have to make pointers. In other words, this stuff here, like Handmade, OpenGL, and that stuff, if we want to, we can just actually put that in the game code and give a pointer back to the platform library. So that's totally fine. For the moment, there won't be, though, until we decide to actually make them call through a pointer. Let's see. Did you see Handmade Quake? Can you confirm whether it's of Handmade quality? I am aware of Handmade Quake, but I have not seen it myself, so I can't confirm or anything else about it. Huber Caleb, Casey, you seem to have a grudge for the ground chunks. Do you really hate them that much? Yeah, because basically they force a lot of multi-threading issues that we wouldn't otherwise have to deal with. And so that's fine if you're getting something of value out of it. Like if I really wanted the ability to do compositing in the background, going through the same render path and all that stuff, right? If I really wanted to be able to do that, then great. But I don't really care. I don't even think I really want the ground chunks anymore. Like after, like I said on the other stream, I don't think the game's actually going to use them. So I think it's just a lot of extra complexity that isn't doing us any good. And we could keep dealing with it just as an exercise because, hey, it's an educational stream, and so why not? But on the other hand, it's like, is that really the most productive use of time? And we've sort of seen how we do it. It would be more of that, and we'd have to like keep thinking about it, and maybe we can clean it up more and make it less of a problem. And that's maybe an interesting challenge. But otherwise, it's like, well, couldn't we just spend our time doing that, spend that time, if we were going to spend it, on something that was more useful to the game, solving that complexity, right? So. Gun Games. Less of a question, more of a thanks for doing this. You've inspired me to pick up C and C++ again after quite a long break, so thanks. I'm very glad to hear that. I hope it goes well. Long Boolean, what was your original goal with the ground chunks and how has that changed? Also, if you remove them, what will you replace them with? So originally I was thinking that the outside of the game, like in the overworld area, was going to be more freeform. But the design of the game is such that I don't want it that way anymore. Like the outside needs to be like kind of tile-like. Like it needs to be, it needs to not be fluid. Things need to be more like a tile map for the game design. Like not talking about the engine, but the actual game design. Needs to be more tile-like, and so I think the art has to back that up, which means that the splatty ground chunk thing is maybe not really a very good idea. The other thing would be, even if it was a good idea, we probably could just do it at runtime anyway, because the hardware rendering path is going to have plenty of extra horsepower. Even the software rendering path could probably do it at runtime with culling. So I don't know. So I think the ground chunks are just a bad idea. Chrono Dragon, you may want to include a note in today's zip file about how it won't compile. You know what we could do? Is there an exit command for batch files? Yes. How's that look? Slayer, why are you wearing earbuds? Are you listening to something? That is actually the microphone. It's the headset that I'm talking to you through. You would not be able to hear me if I was not wearing them. Canuckles, would you at some point compile a list of stuff programmers should know? I'd like some beginner level pointers like this are algorithms, algorithm types you should know, sorting being one type and such. I mean, I think that's a great idea. Do I have time to do that? No, because that's a fairly involved endeavor. There's a lot of stuff that programmers should know. So, is that a good idea? Yes, it is a very good idea. Will I be doing it? Unfortunately, probably not, at least not for several years. Maybe someone else will have time to do it. It would be a nice resource for sure. Any other Q colon? Or are we done? Looks like we're done. All right. We're going to wrap it up. we gonna wrap it up. Save. All right. Good to go. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It has been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you would like to keep up to date on Handmade Hero and play around with it at home, you can always pre-order the game. It comes with a source code. I update it every night, so you can be playing with the very latest and greatest Handmade code base, which tomorrow, hopefully, we will finish with the render reorganization there and be moving on to something else. I'm guessing probably we will have to move on to texture downloading stuff. So that's probably what we'll do. Until then, you can always check out the forums where you can ask questions. Check out our Patreon page if you want to support the video series, and our tweet bot so that you can find out when the series is going to be live. It will be live tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Spoiler alert. But if you want to keep up to date with it, definitely check the tweet bot, because in case I reschedule streams or stuff, that's always the place that's accurate. Until then, have fun coding, everyone, and I will see you guys on the internet. Take it easy.